Testing, testing. Okay, I think everyone can hear me. Hello, everyone. Welcome back from your lunch. I hope you got a chance to have some. I'm Lavinia, but happily for myself, that doesn't matter today because I'm just here to support Myles and David. Before I hand it over to them, can you raise your hand if you were at this morning's session on AI? Okay, good. So it's not going to be like that. So that session was quite general, but Myles and David are going to talk about AI in L&D, which is quite awesome. But, you know, no matter how much experience you have presenting, you still are a bit nervous. So just to support the two of them, can you help me give them a big round of applause, please? Awesome.
Excellent. Yeah. It's a good start. We feel better already, thank you.
Yes. And please remember to do that at the end. All right?
Yeah.
So maybe louder. Yeah, exactly. A little pin will drop. Tumbleweed. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, so we're inevitably, we're going to have something of a conversation about artificial intelligence. It feels like almost a sort of compulsory component of any professional gathering. But what we like to do is, we want to focus on what we think might be transformational, what we've seen from the research in the market that we do with vendors and corporates and other research vehicles that we use, to think a bit, about like some of these themes about like, is it never going to be the same again, and what does that mean, and what does it mean for you in the work you do, for your customers, your stakeholders, and your learners as well. So that's a bit of the theme. Maybe David, if you could click us on. Thank you. So, David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm David Perring. I'm Chief Insights Officer at Fosway Group. I've been with the organisation a long time. I lead lots of our research activities. We're going to skip on a little bit of the top of the surface of many of the research outputs that we've been creating over the last 12 months. We've got 5 free infographics that you can download, which we'll highlight a bit later, which you may or may not have noticed.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so I'm Myles Runham, lead analyst on the digital learning side of the Fosway business. I joined Fosway a year ago, was running my own consulting practice for about 7 years before that. So I've been in and around the industry for a while. Since I joined Fosway, inevitably that theme of artificial intelligence has been, at various different levels of the conversations and the analysis we've been running. So Fosway, we're HR specialists focusing on the European markets. Founded in 1996. So the purpose of Fosway really is to offer clues and guidance to buyers in the market, to apply our research to help people sort of navigate the space, talent, learning and HR space through independent vendor research and EMEA market commentary, as well as various different research vehicles with corporates and corporate learning functions as well.
Just out of curiosity, could you put your hand up if you've downloaded some of our stuff in the past?
Okay.
If you haven't downloaded, talk to the people next to you who put their hand up, say why you might want to.
Right, and one of the things and this is a really important input into the research that we do, is that the corporate network, the corporate membership. So you can register your interest for that. It's not an ad so much as an opportunity to participate in the research. So you'll see some of the research in a moment. It gives you access to to the data we have. It gives you access to analyst time with people like David, myself, and our colleagues. But it also gives you some sort of better access, I guess, to the Fosway intelligence. As well as an opportunity. But one of the things you can do, which is helpful, particularly for David in supporting the work that we do in the analyst team, is an opportunity to feed into the research as well, which sets a lot of the agenda for the work that we do.
Yeah, so we do spend a lot of time doing roundtable events, really trying to get corporates together to talk about their experience, and we use that as inputs into our activities as well. So once we do our quantitative stuff, getting numbers together in personal response, actually it's the voice of the customer or customers of people using digital learning and extra stuff that helps us really get under the skin of what's happening.
So there are 3 things that we want to cover, I guess, in sort of the presentation element and feedback, and then into the Q&A. So a look at where are we now in terms of uptake, adoption of artificial intelligence in the digital learning markets, and how is that innovation transforming learning today. We're going to think a little bit about some of the causes of disruption, some of the economic themes that are actually underneath some of the commentary in the market, which is perhaps not something that we've heard so much about yet. So those are inputs from the research and analysis that, as David was talking about. And then lastly, what does it mean for you and your teams, but for us and our teams generally? And then there'll be an opportunity to get into Q&A. We'll try and get to the Q&A as quickly as we can with Lavinia's help to make sure there's opportunity. But there's also, there are points throughout the session where we'll be asking for your input as well. So where are we now?
Good question. In London.
Yes, that's a start. So there's a quick show of hands. So amongst you, who thinks AI in learning is overhyped? So
what's the matter? Where's the mic? Quickly.
So there's a couple. I think there were a few hands. But, well, let's ask the second question whilst we get to people, perhaps, David. Unless there was, could you put your hands up again? Sorry. Who thinks AI in learning is overhyped? Okay, go ahead. Thanks, David.
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, hi.
Hello.
Currently, yes.
At the moment, it's overhyped, so the promise is yet to be fulfilled.
Absolutely,
Yes.
because using ChatGPT to create content is not AI at its best.
Okay, so it's not AI at its best and possibly not digital learning at its best either. Yeah. So who's doing something with AI at the moment then? Who's using it now in their work? So that looks like, what do you think, David? About a third, maybe a quarter?
Yeah.
Quarter are applying AI in their work at the moment. So it's perhaps to your point about the overhype, as the reality is it's being used, but it's being used initially at the moment. It's not being used. The use is yet to be widespread.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because is AI about the content? Is it about the experience? What role is the AI the coach? Is anybody using an AI coach at all? A couple of hands. Put your hands up and be bold so that people can pick on you later, or including me. But it's really interesting, right? So that sense of trying to develop the inner voice through coaching. There's some interesting research from a lady called Emma Webber who found that people are more honest and open with AI in responding to its questions than they would be with a human being. So super interesting, right? So is it fulfilling its value or promise? Is it overhyped? Possibly, but actually there's other things maybe in uncertain areas where it's making a lot more impact than we probably thought it would do. Do you want me to click on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is this me?
It's you.
Yeah. So we did this survey over last summer, and most people don't think that it's overhyped. Although it may not have necessarily realised its potential, and I think that's a really significant sense. So this sort of sense of foreboding for us as human beings, maybe in our profession, in our role, about what this really means for us. Again, I've got a spontaneous question. Is anybody concerned about how AI may affect their team? No, you don't. You put your hands up, right? So,
Yeah, okay, so some, again.
So let me ask you the other side of the question. Who's not concerned it's going to impact their team? Yeah? And
Okay.
so, we've got... Yeah? Is that a double negative? Give me what should I have said? Who's concerned it's not going to affect their team? So the wisdom is always in the room. Right? So who's concerned it's not going to impact their teams?
So hidden opportunity.
So there's a lot of people in the middle who aren't. Who's just not sure? You're comfortable. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So comfortable with the uncertainty and the...
Yeah, avoid the double negative and a sense of comfort. Thank you. Yeah, right. Avoid the double negative. That's the lesson so far, definitely. Yeah.
Sorry. How many people are excited about the prospect of...
Okay, that's more like it.
Okay. See, I just have to ask the right question. And again, the wisdom is in the room. We need more room on the stage for more presenters. But it's super interesting, right? So excited about the future. And I think if you can start to have some aspiration about where it goes, you've got some clear view about maybe the things that are failing today, then actually there's lots to be excited about. Because I think, when I think about this, I always think, if you thought about the learning cycle, the learning experience that you offer your people today, which bits are broken? Which bits are absolutely awful? And could AI offer some of the rescue to that? So that's the way I think about it. But there we go. we asked people how much the AI was impacting their L&D function. This is last year. In green shows where people were last year. They said not at all, a little, a moderate amount. They said a lot and a great deal, very smaller numbers. Then we said, so what do you think it's going to be like next year, with no expectation of what it meant in terms of the breadth, sophistication, depth, and it just slowly creeps up, right? In the blue, it's like suddenly you got 38% saying it's going to have a big impact on us. It's going to have a lot of an impact. I don't know what that is. We didn't ask that question. I should have done the follow-up question. But that sense of expectation and foreboding is there. And,
I think the expectations are high, actually, which is probably echoed by the show of hands in the room about the sense of optimism and opportunity. The optimism and opportunity seems to be outweighing any sense of risk and threat at the moment, and the expectations of what can be achieved are high. And whether that's realistic or not, we'll come to some of the research evidence, but it's an important question.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think one of the joys of working at Fosway is we get to talk to you as customers, we get to speak to the providers as well. And Myles has been spending the last, 6 months talking to, maybe longer, to different providers. So that sense of how big the promise is, who's really getting close to delivering that, who's doing that with almost unpublished customers. There's a lot of skunk work that's been going on, a lot of difference that's being made that nobody knows about except for these small groups, that is part of that story. Why are people embracing this? What's interesting to me is the thing that wasn't up here, which was cost, right? So the things that are up here, going from left to right, are enhancing learning efficiency, the speed of training. So I guess that comes from personalization, but again, there's no qualification about how that happens, but that's what people said was one of their drivers. We need to speed up training. Maybe that's delivery of training. Maybe it's the content production, maybe the delivery of the service, or whatever. Improving learning effectiveness, the depth of learning. So speeding up the learning so it happens faster, speeding up the depth of learning so the amount that people learn was number 2. Number 3, providing greater personalization. Now, maybe that was the first 2, but put in a different way. And then you've got enabling greater L&D operational productivity being number 4, and then optimizing learning delivery and optimizing learning design and development. So there is this sense of it actually being a lot about the mechanics of learning in the best place and the effectiveness and depth of learning. And I'm not sure if you've seen that in what providers are playing with, Myles?
I think so. What we've seen from the briefings we had with vendors over the course of the kind of back end of last year and early part of this year, there's been a lot of focus on the use of generative AI and other AI tools in the content design and production process. So, which is probably an obvious place to start, and we'll come back to that. But I think it's interesting, David, your point about what we haven't seen is cost in the answers or in the data, but you can see the costs starting to poke through. Yeah. You know, what efficiency means is time and cost, and actually the time and cost reductions, and we'll come back to this, in terms of content creation are substantial. And we're starting to see that now. My view is we'll start to see that from now on. So it's going into vendor roadmaps. People in corporates, are starting to use it now. So the realization of the cost and time savings is probably going to start to come out over the course of this year, I expect.
And the question we didn't ask in the survey, maybe it's an interesting one to ask now, is could you put your hand up if your organisation is under increased cost pressure? And maybe that's your L&D budget or travel budget. Yeah, again, Myles, you're good at estimating. I'm not very good at estimating.
I'd go for 50%.
50%, yeah. So there is this sense of maybe L&D and other departments being under increased scrutiny. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. So the challenges of using AI, and I think this is some of the things that we sort of try to list out. So hopefully you can see a little bit at the back. The text's a little bit small. But over 50% of learning teams see accuracy, reliability, data privacy, and data protection, and the protection of corporate intellectual property. So not leaking out our secrets. Heard a great story about a programming team who'd lost some of their programming code into the internet only for it to reappear in a ChatGPT question for somebody else, their proprietary code suddenly appearing for everybody to use. so that is a really big concern, and I think we're seeing many organizations embrace large language models within their own organization which are constrained, so you're not leaking your insights to others. But it's really interesting, right? So what challenges are you facing? Accuracy and reliability, data privacy, budget constraints. That's an interesting one, about 40%. Limited awareness and understanding of an AI. That was 6 months ago. I'm sure this is changing. And the things down the bottom, gaining stakeholder buy-in is not a challenge. That's interesting. Again, I heard an interesting anecdotal story from a guy I know very well. He does coaching for CLOs, and he said, there are some CLOs who are being challenged by their CFOs to say, you're not replacing headcount without a business case. And that business case has to prove to me that you can't do what that person used to do without automation. Right? Wow. That shows some sort of sense of the gravitas that maybe other stakeholders bring in terms of their expectations, even if our expectations are a little bit lower in terms of what AI can do. And this was one that I think is the one I wanted to sort of just highlight, is those L&D budgets have felt the biggest pinch. We started doing the survey in 2016, and we've always asked the same question. And this year, we've seen the biggest pinch in people's expectations around their L&D budgets in a way that's not happened before. In previous years, only 8% have said their budget is decreasing, even through COVID. This year it's 21%. So we're getting really pinched in that difference. So the level of stalling, the level of uncertainty, the pressure to say, can you do more with less, which has always been there, is rising and rising.
I think just one additional point on that. One of the things we've seen in some of the briefing work we've done is that buying cycles for vendors are getting much harder. So bespoke content design projects, much harder to justify than off the shelf, reusing what you have. Decisions are taking longer, going further up the chain, requiring more evidence, business cases. So the requirement for evidence and promised impact and then evidence of value afterwards is going up as well. So there's kind of economic pressures surrounding a lot of learning functions at the moment at the same time as automation is arriving. So I think it's kind of, if this was a time of economic plenty and automation was arriving, the dynamics might be quite different. But I think it's important to remember that kind of budget picture in the background over the next sort of 12 to 18 months as some of that content automation impact starts to be felt.
Those should ask the question, shouldn't we?
Yeah. So, well, we've asked this already. You're all optimistic, I think.
Yeah.
That was right. Let's just check that.
Outrageously enthusiastic.
Yeah, but I think beyond, we should have had something else above the scale of optimistic. I think we should have had excited as well. But so I think, we've probably covered that. So we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to share some of the analysis in addition of the research we've been doing. So this is kind of just trying to give you a sense of where does this analysis come from. So it comes from those vendor briefings David was describing. So these are kind of meetings and roadmap presentations, presentations about business trends, etc. within the organisation. We've got the survey analysis that David's talked about, the corporate network and the roundtables. One of the most important parts is this customer calls and conversations, which is a really important source of validation for us. We hear a lot of vendors telling us, obviously, that they have exciting opportunities for roadmaps. We've got great customer relationships. It's a great opportunity for us to validate that. We've had the AI research we've seen some of, and also a range of corporate projects. So what we're going to show now is, against some of the 9-grid analysis and other data sources, is a bit of a synthesis of some of these different data points. So we're thinking about so the digital learning 9-grid, that came out maybe 3 weeks ago. So this is alongside the learning systems one, which we'll look at in a moment. So this maps vendors various criteria in terms of their kind of performance and potential. We're not going to get into vendor by vendor. We wanted to just share some of the highlights in terms of the artificial intelligence themes and the innovation themes that came from that research. One of the points that we talked a little about the changing economics. So there's an economic pressure, which everybody is pretty obvious, particularly more so in Europe than other markets at the moment. But one of the interesting things about the arrival of AI is the opportunity to automate. The opportunity to automate the tasks that create content is probably one of the things that generative AI is best at first. It's doing many, many impressive things. And it's a really important thing to think about. The time savings are substantial and arguably dramatic and are going to start to have an impact. One of the reasons for that is that if you think about this notion that e-learning is the perfect environment for the AI prediction engines, is the thought there is that classic e-learning, traditional e-learning, the SCORM-wrapped e-learning has been pretty stable for quite a long time. It's remarkably easy to predict what e-learning is and does. The format, the interactions, the content types, it's almost like given to generative AI engines. They can do a very, very good job with e-learning that they might not be able to do with other kinds of content which are less predictable, which is a really important point. One of the interesting things about looking at lots of the different roadmaps and hearing the presentations from a large number of vendors is everybody's using these tools. Either they've got them live with customers at the moment, they're about to, they're piloting, they're testing, or they're in roadmap development. The majority are using the same technology providers to power their tools. So that might be OpenAI directly, it may be OpenAI in partnership with Microsoft, it could be Google, it could be Facebook and the Llama models and others. So the differentiation for service providers can't come really from the technology itself in terms of AI, because very few are building their own. So they need to look elsewhere for the differentiation. I think it's just something that's going to be really interesting as the AI message unfolds. I don't know if you've been downstairs to the exhibition yet. There's plenty of AI messaging down there. The extent to which you can genuinely sustain service differentiation on the same technologies is going to be interesting. Where do you focus your differentiation? What is that? Is that data? Is it your relationship? Is it your design expertise? We'll come back to some of that. And one of the things that's really, really important as a result of all of these is that the industry kind of has to start to move beyond content now, because content's becoming the easiest part of the problem to solve for learning design, learning experience design, for programs, etc. Getting your hands on the content, making it, creating it, automating, whatever it might be, is probably the easier part of the challenge. It doesn't necessarily mean it's simple and it's not free and easy, but it's becoming the easier part. So where else is the market going to find value? And as David said, that's themes like adaptive personalization, immersion, etc. Don't know, Dave, do you want to add anything?
Oh, I pressed the wrong button.
I think you have.
There we go. That's the
Yeah,
one.
hopefully it's not
Don't
a blank
trust me
one.
with the
Yeah.
technology.
So in terms of the learning systems, we started to see, these are summaries, not summaries of the whole of the analysis. So if you look at the reports, there's analysis of the markets that are much deeper than this. We were trying to pick out some of the highlights that we think are around AI and innovation. So process automation and administration is a really, really important part of learning systems roadmaps, whether that's LXPs or the LMS. And there's a great opportunity for efficiency, as David was referencing there. Personalization of the experience, and increasingly personalization and recommendation of those experiences of the content is becoming much more subtle and much more sophisticated and much more available now. One of the interesting things that's happened in the learning systems market is that it's kind of easier now to offer authoring and authoring tools. So you'll see many, many more learning systems building out the authoring components as these AI tools, particularly generative AI tools, can be used as part of the authoring experience. So again, it feels like that authoring challenge is becoming much more of a solved problem. There's still a lot to do, obviously. One of the interesting things that's out there, as you know, sort of on the horizon, though, is that generative AI, as we all use it, most of us use it, maybe some of us pay, we use the tools for free, but in a commercial sense, these technologies aren't free. In fact, arguably they're quite expensive to run. The providers who run them haven't sorted out their business models yet, but someone's going to have to pay for this. Is that going to be absorbed? Is there going to be price pressure to customers? Is it going to be wrapped into new releases, etc.? I think we're going to start to see probably some of that sort of price tension being released in the market over the coming couple of years as well. So, this is a build, David, sorry. What we tried to do with this, I'm trying to step away and stare at it a little bit, is this is trying to suggest that, simplistically put, 5 kind of service areas for the digital learning market. Content services, program design and delivery, technology, outsourcing and consulting. Where do we think at the moment, from the analysis we've been running, so this will change and it could change quite quickly, where we're going to see AI impact first? Thank you, David. So what we're seeing at the moment, I think, is, as I was saying, that you can start to see the impact coming now, if not live, but more quickly, from this media asset creation, authoring an ID and authoring tools. That's a lot of focus from vendors at the moment on the content component of the solution, which is only one component, but that's then having an impact on off-the-shelf content libraries and off-the-shelf aggregation. So there's a whole content story around this automation, task automation and automation of the production and design component. Skills analysis and skills intelligence is something that actually has been powered by AI for probably a good sort of 5+ years, and is having an impact, and we'll come back to this, upstream of the learning market as well.
And I think what's interesting about the skills side is we've probably seen more progress in other parts of the HR tech market. So you've got specialist providers, people like TechWolf who dive in. You've got people who focus on talent acquisition. Beamery being a good example, who started transition. Eightfold being a good example, who effectively have gathered all the data from people's CVs and all the data from job postings and all the data from people's internal job work profiles to say this is what skills looks like in an organization. And they are probably as far advanced in the analysis of skills than any of the learning platforms, in my experience.
Yeah, that's right. Do you want to click through again, or maybe a couple more, David? Yeah, so I guess what we're thinking is that further out, slightly speculative timeline, we'll start to see maybe the impact on the content research and actually, the influence of choosing and developing the design experience start to play out on solution platforms, which tend to be more specialist rather than just the learning systems. And then start to play out more into outsourcing services, which is a different kind of, I guess, efficiency and cost savings here about the service management, about administration and management of marketplaces and studio services and event management, which are huge overheads and big costs. And the opportunity here for efficiency is very great. Maybe just click through to the last one, David. So, I'm not sure how much there's suspense there is, but let's let it go. And then finally, I guess perhaps the consulting services, probably the AI and data analytics more of an input to consulting value and other areas. So again, this is a view. Current research of what we're seeing is of that kind of the phased rollout of the impact across the market.
And I think one of the really interesting things that's come out from the examples that I've been lucky enough to see is already in that content research area, actually getting the AI to look at documentation, to start to structure it, to make recommendations about, so what should be in the training program, if that's what you wanted to create. People are already applying that and creating an answer maybe in a few minutes in a way that they would have had to have done that themselves, maybe by reading all the documentation and taking five days or so. So the speed, the impact is already there, and we're seeing it out both from providers in certain instances as well as buyers like you.
Yeah. So perhaps it'd be interesting to get this view. So we've been talking to a lot of vendors. Be interested to know, like, if you think about your AI needs or your AI dreams, expectations and hopes, how well is the vendor market supporting your AI needs at the moment? So we'll go hands up in turn. Who thinks the vendor market? So this is the folks downstairs. How well are they supporting your AI needs very well? Who's going for very well? There's a couple at the back.
Oh, maybe we could. Maybe we take the mic in that direction. Is that
yeah? Is
that too dangerous? Where's the roving mic?
There was a couple at the back now. There. Yeah.
So the question was, how well is the vendor market supporting your AI needs? And just curious about those who put their hands up, just to say, who's doing a good job for you, right? Because I should imagine everybody else in the room is interested to know. So,
okay, we've got it. Thank you.
Cool.
We're using Hive Learning, and they have AI over a number of dimensions, one of which is content building. And we've launched a new skills framework, and we've built a learning program for managers in a matter of literally a week, rather than 6 months to build out the content. So it's super quick. And they've also got kind of AI coaches and things like that to kind of help embed the learning.
Great, thank you. I know that was it Hive? You said Hive Learning. Was that right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah. One of the vendors we spoke to, and they have done a lot of work actually on their roadmap around AI, definitely.
Is there anybody else who's got a gentleman at the front? Just again, it's curious. I think it's always interesting to know who's doing some good stuff, right? Or you.
Hi. So my name's Bill, L&D manager from BAT. So obviously everyone's paying attention to AI, and all our vendors are talking about AI, and the situation that we're going to find ourselves in very soon, in 6 months, a year's time, is we'll probably have about 20 vendors with 20 different AI bots
Yeah.
doing 20 different things.
Yeah.
And we're sitting there scratching our heads, they're talking about how do we communicate which AI bot you go to, how many different AI bots we want to direct people to, you know, and where AI bots have overlapping capabilities, which one do you use?
Yeah. Do you want me to answer?
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Damn. I think it's a really interesting question, but I think different AIs have different audiences, so it doesn't surprise me that we'll end up with multiple AIs. And I think one of the interesting things that we've seen from some of the providers is actually nesting AI into particular parts of a process. So that it both does an element or a stage, and also then validates that stage before it passes it on to the next AI to do the next part. So I think there's some really interesting things of, yes, there's going to be a lot. They will be contextual up until the point we find a way of bridging. And it may be that actually you have a super AI who's your portal, and then it calls on the specific AI, probably guessing your context a little bit, to then pull back what is the best expert. Because a lot of the AI in some ways is being trained in particular specialisms. And it's actually that specialism which is the differentiator. And there's some great things that we're seeing, say, with some of the adaptive learning providers, right? They are scanning through all of your content. They are then getting a recommendation of this might be the structure. Then it's handing it off to the next AI, which is saying, actually, these are the best ways of structuring that content in terms of a learning experience. All right, so those things are already happening. You may not be visible even on their stands at the moment, but we know those things are working their way through. So I think that there is potential conflict, but only insofar as we have conflict when we walk into a room and we say, who can help me, right? Then it needs to be some qualification, and I think the context will drive some of that. But my expectation is at some point you will have the touch point of the AI, and then it will call on the specialists. A bit like you as a team, right? That's my view, but I don't know if anybody else has got a more informed view. Possibly. Myles, I don't know.
No, it's fine. No, I think I want to know who thinks the vendor market's doing okay. It's okay for your supporting your AI needs. It's kind of okay average. Okay. So that's maybe about 10. Yeah. So who thinks the vendor market is doing poorly to support your needs? There's a lot of abstainers in the room as well, who may be working for vendors, actually, which is quite possible.
Is that a different voting option of don't know?
Don't know, yeah. Maybe there's a don't know option. Who doesn't know? Someone at the back.
Honest person.
I think it's interesting, though. I think one of the things, and there seems to be a bit of a tension with the expectations are high. There's a sense of optimism, at least in this room, and a sense of a high expectation from the data we've seen as well. Yet the kind of experience and practice is low. So it feels like there's sort of sense of unknown opportunity out there. Vendors are working hard to apply what they think makes commercial sense for them, and what their customers will draw on. But there's a lot yet to find out. And I think it's one of the things that we're going to see is perhaps this isn't necessarily going to slow the market down, but experiments are yet to happen. So realistic expectations being met or not, we don't really know. The risks, are they greater than we thought or lower? Don't yet know. I think there's a lot at play here that's still unresolved. And again, against some of those claims and the potential and the power of the opportunity, the reality is, it's not that it won't happen, but I think we need to be a little bit careful about understanding, what the risks are and the steps towards that value are as well. Hi. Well, we have another question at the front.
So much a question, it's actually a comment, because I think this is really spot on. So when I raised my hand for saying it's poorly, I really don't know about the tech part, if that is poorly. But what I can say is poorly is the understanding from vendors about AI and how it affects my organization and how to support me in then implementing it. And that goes across. So when you have your little 9 grid, one of the things that I'm really missing in that in general, I'll take the opportunity to give some feedback here too. Thank you. Anyhow, what I'm really missing is my vendor also needs to be my expert advisor in the sense of how do I implement it, particularly when I sit in an organization that is complex, multinational, ABC. And I know this because it's also, once you put in motion something like AI, such as a skills graph, for example, it is super difficult to take back when you have an organization with 300,000 employees. And the vendor goes, oops, we didn't develop that properly, or whatnot. So I think that is one of my key thoughts about how do we get the vendors to become educated in how to then be expert advisors to us.
Yeah,
Not only about the text.
I think it's really. I think this is probably a broader theme from the digital learning research, which is not necessarily to do with AI or not necessarily to do with technology, is about service provision rather than sales. And I think there's, the market has tended to fixate on technology and content and on selling those, which is not wrong because people are buying it. But I think now some partly economic pressures, partly complexity of organisations, partly the need to be more evidence-based about what's going on and why you're doing it, is putting pressure on a more kind of service-led requirement, which is about understanding needs, understanding context, articulating problems, designing well against them, applying evidence-based principles and practices to that design, etc. And that kind of service component is becoming much more valuable. And the providers that are good at that, it's harder to sell, but those are the ones that will have the sustained advantage because it's not the technology that's valuable because everybody's got the same technology. So that service provision is crucial, but it's hard. And there aren't that many people who do it well, and they're hard to find, they're hard to onboard. But I think you're right, it's a really, really important part of the market. And I think, if I were a buyer, that's where I would put my questions going around the show, is, what's your service component? Not a service layer, but what's the service value in there as well. I think it's a really good point. If that was the point, sorry. Okay, it's good. You're nodding, so I'll just follow that with it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I've got who's this bit. So how AI and innovation is transforming learning today. So what we've tried to do is just give you a view. So we asked people what they were doing with AI. And when you look down the list, where AI is already being applied, most significantly is in translations. Right? So people are already embracing that, and I'm sure there's lots of you who put your hands up saying, actually, that's one way we accelerate our approach. Media generation, I should imagine, has anybody got a DALI account or used DALI in the last year or so? Does anybody not know what DALI is? Yeah? Myles, maybe you could do a better explanation of DALI than I
gosh.
can.
Okay. Well, DALI's it's a tool for automatically generating images from text. So from a text input, you can say, please show me an image of a conference speaker as a clown, for example, or as a cartoon clown. And it will create that for you, effectively. So it's a sort of automatic image generation tool.
Wish I'd included an extra slide now, but we'd had too many.
Well, a conference speaker as a cartoon clown.
That as well. But we did a presentation last year, and you just go to DALI and type in the sentence, and it will come out, give you 5 different images. And I use those in some presentations, but that's a different story. AI for content recommendation is there in place. Again, interesting to hear who you've been using in that area, if you've got anybody that you're using to augment that. But the AI content recommendation isn't just coming from learning management systems. We're seeing it come from internal mobility platforms, the solutions that connect individuals to future work, which is super interesting, right? So that's almost driving a different touch point in the learning experience to say, you didn't go to a learning management system, I just pushed the next best job for you and said, if you had this qualifications attached to that, you'd be an even better fit for the job. Yeah, so those things, those recommendations are almost becoming part of other processes within HR, which is super interesting. AI-enabled LMS, LXP starting to trail off. AI-generated learning and content authoring, you've got 25% who are already using, and the blue is the piloting. AI for adaptive learning, only 14% were already using adaptive learning, which was powered by AI, and actually it's probably difficult to have an adaptive learning engine that isn't using some form of AI. They're probably very much wrapped together. But it is interesting, right? Because I would say, out of all that list, if I was going to be a buyer and starting to want to experiment, adaptive learning is the one place I'd go as a starting point. Because that's all about personalization. That's about making sure that Myles goes through the course in 20 minutes because he knows 90% of the stuff, and David has to go through 5 hours of learning because he doesn't know very much at all. rather than making me go through everything as consistently as everybody. And ultimately, when we think about the economics of content and the economics of learning, the cost is not in the content. It may come up with a big figure, but the cost of consuming, taking that learning, is much higher in terms of the time and effort when you start to pro-rata it out across all your learners. So I can see in the future some really significant shifts in business case of, actually, I need to spend more on my learning because it reduces the cost of consumption. If I've got 20,000 people to train, then actually if I can reduce the impact on my business 20,000 times because everybody did a lot less, that's a great business answer. And that may dwarf the £20,000 I would have spent on the training program. So the true economics of this are going to start to play their way through. And I think adaptive learning, even though it's 63% considering in the future, that is going to be a big change. And I think if you're a developer of e-learning, my personal view is adaptive learning is partly your savior from being commoditized. Because I can get the answer out of ChatGPT.
All lines kind of join up in the end, don't they? So everyone is either doing it or thinking about it.
Yeah,
The very last
that's one.
You've
Yeah,
almost got a straight line at the end.
yeah, definitely. Everybody's thinking, yeah, exactly. And the bit about AI-enabled coaching, I think is super interesting as well. Nobody's that interested at the moment, but what would it be like if everybody in your organization had a coach? And actually, if your coach was all about asking the question of, what's the most important thing for you? What are you worrying about at the moment? What's your biggest business challenge? And how advanced or behind are you in solving that challenge? That is a perfect training needs analysis. Right? You can start to target every individual just by taking the time to ask them, what are you struggling with? What's giving you pain? And what progress do you need to make by when? So that bot is not just, maybe this is the thing about that sort of nested view, that bot can drive so much more in terms of the personalization if we choose to look at it that way. But if we just look at it through the content lens of, I need to create more content like I used to, I think we'll probably fail like we've done with the content that we used to create, have always created. But there we go. So, I'll take a step back for a moment. I've ranted long enough.
I wonder whether we might have asked this already, but we're just interested to know, of those who are using it, what's making a difference? What's kind of moving the needle? What you're most interested in and excited about? If you are adopting AI or applying it at the moment in your digital learning work, then what's the value that you're getting?
Should we take a little 2-minute conversation? Oh, people with their hands up already, so we might need a bit more time to talk.
Too late, sorry, Dave.
Hello, thank you. My name's Kim Blanchard. I'm from Activate Learning, Director of Digital Education and AI. We're developing our own AI. I think the exciting bit about it is that we can be creative for our learners. We work in the field of further education, and so that malleability of it and creating the walled gardens so we can protect our and safeguard our learners ethically is the exciting bit about it.
Yeah. Super exciting.
Okay, it's interesting because I suppose safety and protection is often seen as the risk factor. In fact, most often, I think. But it's interesting for you that's actually the opportunity is that you can create an environment for conversation, experimentation, and expression that is much safer. Interesting.
Okay. Is there others who wanted to say anything about that? Maybe it's just a bit early in the journey.
There's someone at the front here as well.
I'll go back.
The person down here.
Hi, I'm Pippa, L&D, Nestle. What is impacting in my team at the moment, we're trialling an AI coach. And we're finding it's not just about coaching, but also it's as though you've got a colleague who doesn't have their own workload, and you can brainstorm with them, and they can help you with your job so that you're more creative and more efficient, and you get to the big issue faster, but you're not adding to the workload of like, oh, could you fit in a meeting later today? But they're just there for you, and that's exciting.
It was super interesting. There was, again, I'll just go off on a tangent if I'm allowed. There was some research from Boston Consulting Group about their Boston consultants, if I can say it like that. They had a control group who didn't use AI, and they had the sort of bell curve of performance. And the high performers were rating about a 7 or an 8. Then they had a different group who were using AI. And what happened was all of the average users became high performers. They were performing at the same level as the high performers who didn't have the AI. And I think that's a super indication, right, of this is biting in those sorts of organizations already. And they're looking at the opportunity for how AI supports the individual. So those sort of knock-on effects of it will impact us and our ability to do coaching, enables us to do better things, is a really interesting story. And it is effectively, you raise the performance of an average performer from a 5 to an 8. And actually, the high performers don't move that much further on. So you can hire average people to get better results. That's not a bad answer, right? It's an amazing answer.
I think there's something really interesting that you pointed to there as well about because the sort of quite sophisticated conversation you can have with the generative AI models. You know, they make mistakes, they tell lies, yes, but you know, I've told a couple of lies and I have made a mistake. But they are, I think one of the things that's really interesting is think of them as a tool or a colleague. And what you're describing is more of the, you know, here's a kind of colleague kind of experience that isn't just a tool that makes a thing or does a thing or fills in something. This is a, you know, it's a source of feedback, guidance, conversation. That's quite an interesting, you know, for some people it's terrifying, for some people it's a great opportunity, but it's a really interesting, different way of thinking about technology, I think, in the workplace. Another question over there, or comment? Or
Yeah, it's a comment about AI not usually being that productive. It doesn't have to be complex. For instance, I'm working for Bridgestone Mobility Solutions, leading the Bridgestone Academy. And as many companies in Europe, we have the challenge of bringing the training content to different languages. And you know, in Europe, it's a mess. You have to have at least 5 to 6 large languages so I can really cater the internal audience. And we all know that we can do the translations with the help of AI tools, but recently we managed to find a tool that actually dubs the video content in the voice and also with the lip sync in the language you target. Yeah. And it's really freakish to see yourself speaking Japanese, Turkish, or even French. Yeah. And it looks so real because it's your voice. But implications are we can replicate, scale the training content and save so much time and money, which is something that all, I think, managers and stakeholders want to see first, low-hanging fruit. And then we'll talk about the AI coach later, because we have proven that this is really working.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and we'll come to that, I think, in a minute, that sense of, you know, like this is, whether you think it's brilliant or not, it's good enough for production, and it's quick, and it's cheap, and I think that's a big impact, definitely. Should we press forward? So one of the things that we've seen, and this is a kind of an amalgam of different research inputs, is this idea of an emerging sort of digital learning solution toolkit. So this is just thinking quite a simple model of the solution cycle, a simplified solution cycle for creating digital learning or e-learning, you might expect. And it's not that there's one tool, there's not one provider with this toolkit, but these components are starting to emerge. David talked about that kind of search, the research and subject research analysis, you know, the automation of ingesting SME content, doing that very, very quickly, very, very accurately. A lot of the conversations we've had have suggested that, you know, SMEs are seeing automated content that's created from their inputs, video. It might be video, it might be podcast, audio, you know, reports, presentations, changing just one or two minor components. You know, that fidelity is quite high already. This idea of a learning design assistant for prototype creation is interesting. Some models being trained on learning design, you know, evidence-based learning principles, etc., as a kind of thinking partner. And none of this is new, but it's just interesting that these are starting to emerge around, you know, quite a familiar solution cycle. I mean, you know, we've talked already about media asset creation, so that might be, so you said synthetic media, avatars, etc., prompt-based content creation. All of these are probably the tools that are the most famous or we know most. Then into the authoring and ID, then, which is taking those assets into authoring your learning solution. Again, prompt case, course creation. Some of that's becoming quite advanced, it seems. So a number of providers are looking beyond a sort of just a simple component of a course to creating kind of task agents that work together on creating almost like a whole program and starting to automate that. It's not necessarily live yet, but that's the way it's going. And then into the kind of analytics and reporting. So it's like to see these components are kind of coming together as a new set or a different set of tools for that kind of learning design and process. But it's really important. I mean, this is, as we've said, there's a sort of, maybe not a tension, but there's these different dynamics. So this is about content production, or is it about learning experience? Where's the value? Where's the disruption? Should it be only about content production, or should it be more about the learning experience? I guess that's for the market to decide. But you can see different directions being.
But I think it's also for
there.
you to demand, right? You're the customer. There are providers, and you can either go for I want more content production, or you can say, give me a better learning experience. And I think that's for us. It's our gift to make those choices. Even if they don't necessarily appear to us immediately. This is just this sense of, we heard earlier about the skills graph, and I'm not sure, how many of you have a skills graph in your organization at the moment? A small number at the front, 2 or 3, a smattering. Again, if you haven't got a skills graph in your organization, it's something to maybe talk to those people who sneakily put their hand up, because it's one of the foundations for what's happening for the employee experience overall. This sense of actually the AI can start to support me building my own individual profile of my skills, my competencies, my capabilities, my qualifications, my expertise. So why I am valuable at work, and start to build in inference of actually you've been in that job for 5 years. You probably know these things too. You've been working on those sorts of projects. You probably know these things too, which enables us to get a sense of the people who work for us in our organization. It's almost a currency of capability. Already we've seen providers who will say, actually, based on the value of your skills, if you had to go out to market and hire them, they would cost you this much. They are genuinely looking at human capital as the skills that exist in that organization, which is super interesting to me. But as you move on, you can start to think about, actually, so what are the future jobs in our organization? And that has already been determined, deciphered by solutions like Fathom, for example, who are starting to look out across the marketplace and say, this is the sort of trend direction for jobs of this type. This is sort of roles that are tasks that are being done by AI, and this is your organization. Are you ahead? Are you behind? What's the gap overall in terms of the strategy for your industry? So that takes you into this area of strategic workforce planning, which then enables you to say what people are a good match for the vacancies of the future and the vacancies we have today. And then you can start to push those to individuals to make recommendations for gigs, for projects, for work, and enable effectively a career path which is dynamic and real for your individuals. And if you add in the learning support and learning activities you've got, you can even make recommendations to say you'd be even a better match if you did this learning or completed this certification. And that becomes a flowing loop, right? Because people can apply for a job, don't have to wait 2 years for their manager to say they can go, they grow their capability, you're growing the future of the organization. Now, why I think this is super important is we know that from LinkedIn skills and data analysis that from 2015 to 2025, there's about a 41% change in the skills for a particular role. So even to stay hireable in your current role, it's likely up to 40% of your skills have changed. So even to be relevant for your own job, you need to be learning, let alone if you wanted to be learning for a new job and being pointed in that direction. But it also raises the question of actually what sort of learning experiences do you need, and actually the power of being learning on the job. But that sense of actually the touch point for learning, as I said earlier, starts to change. This is not a cycle that gets generated out of your learning management system. It's a trigger from your talent mobility platform. So your learning has to surface there, not wait for somebody to come out of that platform to log into a new system to go and search for the learning. It needs to be offered up in context. And that's probably one of the biggest changes I expect to see over the next 3 or 4 years. Actually, it's happening now with those platforms. They are starting to own part of that people development, that career development journey. So what does this mean for your learning team? Myles, I suppose.
Yeah, well, these are a few of the questions that you know we've talked about. This sort of sense of efficiency. Is this an opportunity? You know, is this a threat of redundancy, or is it an opportunity for reinvention? How much of that is in our control? It's about business needs and the value proposition, not just the creation and production and distribution of learning and learning content, which brings you to the sense of, you know, being value-centered. Is it a transformational opportunity, you know, which I think is a sense that it feels like in the room there's a potential for a transformational opportunity, but how do you get your arms around that, and what do you do, and who do you work with to make that happen, and what's possible now that was too hard before? I think this is, you know, this feels like this is where to focus that sense of transformational opportunity is. What would you love to do that you couldn't do, couldn't afford to do, didn't have time to do? Is probably an area for some of that focus. I think, David, can we move through, because I think we've
sure.
we need to head. Sorry, I was just taking my cue. So there's one way of thinking about this is that the automation opportunity for traditional learning, huge automation opportunity for the creation and production and publishing of what you might call digital learning or e-learning, and this is kind of what's happening now and what's coming now. The efficiency opportunity is substantial, as in it could save more than 50% of time and money. It could save more than 75% of time and money. What used to take 5 days could take a day. You know, these, I'm not trying to sort of be alarmist, but these are substantial economic changes to the way the market works. These are early signals of those substantial changes. So, you know, the calls for a response to this. I think if you move through, David. So that, but against that, the solution potential, and we've talked about most of this really, personalization, adaptation. We talked perhaps a little less about immersion and practice, this idea of doing more rather than consuming, the opportunity to gain feedback from that practice. Immersion doesn't necessarily mean, you know, a virtual reality headset. It could be something that's just more experiential, where you do more than consume, and has that sense of, you know, opportunity to explore scenarios and do that at scale. Feedback and guidance, this sort of unpacks some of that thinking about the bot conversations that we were talking about earlier, the opportunity to get feedback at scale for certain, you know, actions and interactions. It feels like quite an exciting opportunity. There's an important opportunity just for the administration and process of that. I think the notion of discovery and triggering of the learning as well, getting the right thing to the right people at the right time. It feels much more plausible now than it did. And then also there's a kind of a much more powerful set of analytics. Behavior analytics is a really interesting part of that kind of conversation component. What you can see and hear from conversations, what that tells you about people's expectations and their understanding is really interesting as well. So you've got this sense of this sort of efficiency, opportunity or threat, then this kind of, you know, the solution potential. But underneath this, you've got to, you know, this is where the sort of the opportunity comes to life, is that, you know, which we were talking earlier on, I guess, about this sort of potential for service. If you've got your service component right, where you're doing the analysis and the performance needs, you've got strong relationships, and you need to be good at design. You know, these are the stuff that's much, much harder to automate. This is the stuff that has the sustained value that helps you apply the technologies to those solutions. So it's just kind of trying to sort of, as a summary way of trying to wrap up some of those themes.
And so I suppose just this last slide, to think about what does AI really mean. I think probably about 5 years ago we talked about digital transformation, and AI is the living embodiment of much of that digital transformation today. And what it changes fundamentally is the customer experience. And I mean this in the broadest sense. This isn't just about L&D, it's not about HR, this is about what happens in business. Because AI gives you different customer experience touch points. Right? It gives you different points that trigger your interaction with that organization process. It gives you customer intelligence and insight, which enables you to do personalization. And we've seen that, I suppose, historically in Amazon, etc. That is starting to grow and grow. And actually, it's the more we know about our people, which enables us to provide more personalization in terms of the learning experiences are relevant to them. Enables better reach in terms of needs and contacts and value adds. So it changes fundamentally the customer experience. And that's one thing, if you go back and think about your learning, think about how you need to change your learner experience. What is it about the whole learning cycle that needs to adapt? And equally, in terms of the processes, you get enablement, so you can augment the performance of your developers who are creating learning. You can augment the performance of your coaches because they've got better insight into the individuals. You can increase operational performance because you've got higher levels of productivity. I think we were talking about 80% being the speed with which some of the AI can now generate classic e-learning content. 80% faster. It's difficult not to want to buy into that if that was the right answer in terms of learning. But it also enables new processes. So like we were talking about that coaching side, that sense of how did you listen to understand what people needed? Yeah, there can be a new process that enables a new customer experience. And then finally, just it changes the business model. This sense of how do I cut cost? How do I create higher value? How do I reach with greater speed and scalability? How do I enable a new digital business model? Actually, that comes from, to some extent, the AI, and that could be included in that sense of, actually, do you know what? We never had adaptive learning. We never gave people their individual learning experience. Now we can, and we charge more for that than we've ever done before, because the value was in the speed of completion, not the cost of production. And I mean that completion by the learner rather than the cost of production by the L&D team. So we are at the end. Those are some of the things that we had.
Go to the question.
You can sit in the background, maybe.
But we've got some time. I think we have, Levany, we have a few minutes left for any questions, if there's anything that's on your mind that you haven't heard or you disagree with or you'd like to hear more of. Whilst you take photographs of the summary slide. Any questions, comments, hopes, fears? No, fair enough.
Sir?
Oh, there is one at the front here.
Yeah, I want to put my hand up again. I've spoken twice already. I'm just wondering, in terms of the research and engagement you've done, we talk about, in the conference this morning, they were saying 60% of jobs could have like 30% of their, tasks automated or more. Have you seen that happen already, where people have started to automate aspects of people's roles and then reskilling, going on that kind of reskilling journey and start realizing the kind of ROI of investing in AI and AI automation? Like, have you seen that happening yet?
I think we've seen, probably what we've seen is more anecdotal than kind of, formally evidence-based in that way. But I think it's happened in pockets. But it's more sort of anecdotes of maybe a new role not being created or not hired, because you can share that out amongst the existing team, because these tools can do enough of that well enough. And I think that's where the kind of economic pressures that David was talking about, that kind of sense of budget pressure and the automation kind of start to come together in a more pressured way. I think one of the things that's important to, and I think this is part of the commentary that a lot about, well, these tools are okay, but they don't do a great job, do they? I think, but the question is not, do they do a brilliant job? Do they replace the best humans? The question is, do they do a good enough job? And that's the challenge. It's like, good enough works, good enough sells, good enough works in lots of organisations. So the challenge for us is, I think, is are these tools good enough? Not are they the best? And I think that's where some of this, the challenge of the economics of the automation are going to start to hit the market, because they're very quick at being good enough. And and in a market that might not always hold the excellent standard, then there's a response required.
But I think it's that challenge from the CFO to say, why do we need to replace the headcount? I think that's a good example. And actually, the nature of training is already changing. We're seeing, I saw a great video on YouTube of a programmer learning to program in Python data visualization. Didn't know how to do it, just by asking ChatGPT what code he should use. Right? Why did I need a course? Why did I need a training program? What should I have been doing? They just type into ChatGPT, based on these variables, how would I construct the code? They copy and paste the code in, and then say, well, how do you move the legend down to the bottom or include a legend? It gives them the code. All they had to do is apply it to their context. And that is a dramatic change in what we'd have thought about the effort to create a course. Do you need a course, right? And that's the thing, right? In certain instances, and that was just a good example for learning code. Sorry.
David, sorry to interrupt. We have a question here as well. Sorry, we're just running tight.
Sorry.
We've got one here, and then another one here, I think. Sorry,
Okay.
I beg your
Lady
pardon. There's a lady here too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And there's one here as well. Okay, so we go
I'll be
1,
quick.
2, 3, 4. Is that fair? He says, waving at people. Go ahead.
We talk about the use of AI in the generation of content, and a lot of the references to that is to do with efficiencies and capability. Is there any evidence, or are you aware of any evidence in the measuring the impacts of outcomes of AI-built content versus human-built content? And is there any research around this?
I think there's a person called Dr. Philippa Hardman who is worth following. She's doing some research into this at the moment and released some initial findings where she was running an experiment that compared 3 groups: human, ChatGPT, and a tool that they'd built called Epiphany, which was a kind of LLM for learning design. And they were monitoring the speed and the quality by an expert panel in terms of learning design, quality of imagery, etc. And that last group, Epiphany, was faster and better. That's a very, very simplified version. I'm sure she would throw things at me if she was here. But so I think, but it's an interesting example of in a sort of traditional e-learning context of quality and efficiency. But I think it's very early days. So I think that the extent to which we have good evidence about the efficacy of learning, is an open question. Adding AI into the mix complicates it further. I guess we'll watch and see. But Dr. Philippa Hardman is worth following on that topic, definitely.
Hi, it's Ingrid. I'm from PwC and I'm a learning consultant. Actually, you just touched upon what I was going to mention. Lately, I've been having a lot of conversations with my clients about, okay, AI improves a lot the productivity. However, actually, why should I invest in learning if now they just can literally ask Copilot or ChatGPT? So when I received this question, I was like, okay, I mean, I don't know yet if this is the way forward, right? I mean, I'm still like I still believe that yes, it should build a learning strategy around your skills needs and etc. But when they asked me this question, even myself, with 10 years experience, I was like, okay, should I be thinking about it? Like, should I stop actually building any kind of digital learning? And even though the learning is also embedded in the workflow, because they literally asking me, Ingrid, I don't need that. I can just literally ask Copilot or ChatGPT. So why should I invest in learning?
And I think and that comes down to the value question. What value or risk was related to that individual? And if it's low value and low risk, and actually the answer is easy with ChatGPT, it would be silly not to use it, right? But you then have to be really clear about how you articulate your value. And a lot of that comes down to business readiness and the outcomes that somebody is ready to achieve. So if you've got to learn it yourself, so to speak, you've got to have time to do that. If it can be quicker for you to provide the input to build people's expertise level, then provide the intervention. But you need to have the evidence that shows that actually the way you can do it is better than the cheaper alternative, so to speak. And I think that's one of the challenges for us, right? We need to be really clear about what value we drive. And it may be that actually the focus is not on enabling that ability to learn the coding, but enabling their manager to be a great coach so that they actually get more excited to learn faster with greater passion, right? So it is your focus and what you're trying to enable. And I think there is something about business readiness and expertise where you may have a winning hand to play.
I have another question.
Yes, we have another question there.
Okay.
You can go ahead. You have 4 questions.
No,
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Beatrice. I'm from World of Work consulting company in the Netherlands. I implement a lot of skills-related tools. Yeah. And what I am wondering about is how you guys perceive the quality of the skills ontologies that these vendors provide, because I see a lot of clients moving to their own skills graph, which is actually, so I'm wondering, Are you doing research towards that? And
Well, we've done lots of conversations specifically around skills with organisations and also service providers who help unpick the automated skills ontologies. Their feedback is you do need to go through with a fine-tooth comb the things that are recommended to you. They are best guesstimates of what should be the relevant skills for a particular role. You need to focus your effort not on everybody, the entire organisation, but choose key audiences and go through line by line and say, does that make sense? Does it not make sense? And they go through, they say, even on a surface scan, you can take out the 20% that is meaningless. But lots of organisations, they say, because they do it as almost on a consulting basis, don't want to do that extra legwork. But you have to do it to make it work. It does need human intervention to fine-tune and align.
But would it be possible, and I think there are vendors that do that already, to create an alignment for the AI to actually do this first cherry picking or maybe crossing out? And which companies are doing this well, in your opinion?
The ones that we're hearing of actually are Belgian. So there is a company called TechWolf.
TechWolf.
And those guys have developed some very focused AI activities, which are very domain specific. They look at the work that people are doing. So they've done some nice work with people in the holiday industry who are actually not about holidays, much more about programming, to understand what the code people are writing, what the area of checks they make, and what therefore skills do they have.
I heard good stuff about them as well.
So we hear some really nice stuff around. Now the background is all in.
I'm going to come and stand next to you to do some active chairing because I think unfortunately I'm sorry.
I have the awful role of stopping this lovely conversation, but there is a Fosway booth downstairs, and I know Myles and David are going to be around whenever you can go and talk to them. And yeah, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to you too.
Thanks everybody.